So welcome back. This is ASTROFX fundamental lessons, and we are going to do lesson 1 on the actual fundamentals, and this is interest rates. So what are interest rates? This is when you deposit money into a bank and you get something in return. Each bank in the world has its own interest rates, and there are even private banks that offer interest rates as well. They're important in FX because if one country has a higher interest rate than another country, then the money will be moved to the country with the highest interest rate, as long as it's safe. Each country has its own different interest rate because they all perform differently. When they change, that's when things become interesting. So just moving back to this previous slide, so it's normally measured in a percentage terms. So let's say, for example, you put £100 into a bank account. If the bank gives you a 1% interest rate, then you're going to receive £1 back every year or whatever. They all decide 6-month maturities, yearly maturities. They all do it differently. But that's basically the difference in interest rates. Now these are set by central banks, so we can discuss this. Who are the main central banks? In the US, the Federal Reserve, they trade in US dollars. ECB, European Central Bank in the EU, they trade in euros. Bank of England for the UK, and they're in GBP. Bank of Japan for Japan, and it's JPY. Bank of Canada, obviously Canada, and Canadian dollars, so CAD. Royal Bank of Australia, also known as the RBA, they're for Australian dollars, so AUD. RBNZ for New Zealand, and they trade in Kiwi dollars. And we also have the PBOC for China, and they trade in Chinese yuan, so CNY. Now, there are other central banks in the world. We're just focusing on the main ones. On the pictures on the right hand side, the one at the top, the current Federal Reserve Chairman is Jerome Powell, and underneath we have Mark Carney, who's from the UK. So we'll discuss some other important people and how they work, but these are the main central banks and the currencies that they affect and the countries that they're from. Why interest rates change? They change because of how each economy is performing. If an economy is performing well, then the interest rate in that country will rise. Gross domestic product, which is GDP, so this little graph on the right hand side with all the countries in it on the little block, that tells you which countries have the biggest GDP and which ones have the lowest GDP. You can see the states are quite far in the lead, and then China are quite close after, but this can affect how the countries want their interest rates to be at that particular time. Inflation. So this is the consumer price index box at the bottom right of the screen, and this is a measurement of the cost of a basket of goods in that particular country. How expensive is it for the people of this country to afford those goods? Confidence. Now this is key. So if businesses are confident, they're going to make more money, they're going to invest more money. Do they need to receive more interest from their banks at that particular time? That's how you need to think, is basically, are the businesses in those economies confident to invest? Competitiveness. So if, for example, all the countries, all the major central banks are lowering their interest rate, are you going to be the only country that keeps your interest rate high? That's important because at the moment we're seeing a race to the bottom. So all major central banks are lowering their interest rates, and they're all following each other one after another. Political pressure. So Trump, for example, he's not a fan of Jerome Powell from the Fed, so he puts a lot of pressure on Jerome Powell, saying he doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't understand economics, he's making the US less competitive, and he's under extreme pressure to lower interest rates. So political pressure is also important in understanding interest rates. What to look out for? Any comments from any central bankers. This is very, very important. When any central banker is speaking, especially the ones that vote on interest rates, you must hear what they have to say because it gives you clues for the future. What do central bankers look for? They look for trends in other central banks. Also, how the economic numbers are changing. Like, for example, manufacturing, retail sales, things like that. Services, PMIs, how are they affecting the country? So they'll look and see what data points are important for their interest rate setting announcements. Is the country competitive compared to other countries? We've discussed this a little bit, but it is also important in regards to, let's say, for example, the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan have negative interest rates, and they also print a lot of money every single month, and that means that the yen in relative terms compared to how it was is very weak. So they need to see if they're remaining competitive, and the reason why Japan wants a weak yen is because they're an exporting nation. They export a lot of goods, cars, electrical goods, etc. So if you're another exporting nation, you're going to be upset about this and you're going to try and devalue your currency. That's why we talk about competitiveness. Change in central bankers' thoughts. Now this is I can't stress this enough. This is something that you need to know. So recently we had Jens Weidmann, who is an ECB member, helps set the Eurozone monetary policy. So euro dollar, for example. He's very hawkish, all the time was saying, that they don't think that ECB should be doing QE. ECB should raise interest rates. Every single time anybody spoke to him, he was very bullish on the euro and things that should happen there. But then all of a sudden, one day, he changed his mind, decided that yes, the ECB should cut interest rates, yes, QE maybe should come back into the markets, and the euro fell very, very quickly. First of all, it was an important ECB member because it was from Germany, the biggest economy in the Eurozone, and then other than that, notoriously hawkish member all of a sudden turns dovish. So the market took notice, basically. So that's the main thing to keep an eye on with interest rates. One other thing I would like to say about it is that the central banks are giving forward guidance, and people do keep track on interest rate probabilities. So we discussed interest rate probabilities quite often. So for example, at the next meeting, what is the chance that the ECB will cut interest rates? At the next meeting, what is the chance that the Bank of England will raise or cut interest rates? We'll always look at these percentage figures, and we collect evidence and clues for this, but also the market do this as well. So everybody does this. So all investment banks, a lot of hedge funds, even the futures market, they look at whether they think that what in percentage terms is the likelihood of an interest rate to change. And sometimes when those consensus estimates change, then the market will run with it. So Australian dollar is a good example of this. Recently at the last meeting, everybody thought that the RBA were going to cut their interest rate. They didn't cut their interest rate, and then they changed their rhetoric a little bit and sounded a little bit more positive. So then the market started pricing in for the next interest rate change, which was the month after, the fact that they weren't going to move, and the Australian dollar appreciated. So that's how the market works. They try and second guess, they try and preempt interest rates, but interest rates are very, very, very important, because if you're living in a country and you're depositing your bank, think like a millionaire and billionaire. You're going to want something in return by putting your money in that bank. If you're not getting it there, you're going to move it to somewhere else where you are going to get an interest back. So that's the way you need to keep an eye on this. Now, in the next session, we'll start talking about GDP and inflation and how that has an impact on interest rates. So we're going to keep going on with this, and hopefully if you do have any questions, you can send them in. But other than that, we're getting a bit of better understanding of what the economics are looking like. But the interest rates are the number one thing to look out for.